The letter arrived on a Tuesday, an unremarkable day for such a remarkable instrument of destruction. It was thin, almost weightless in my hand, but it carried the gravity of a tombstone. The bank's logo, a sterile and impersonal symbol of corporate power, was printed in the top left corner, and just seeing it made the coffee in my stomach turn to acid. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. I had been dreading this specific piece of paper for months, watching it materialize in my nightmares, a ghostly premonition that now had a physical form, a tracking number, and a due date. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from the threads of what used to be. Not so long ago, this same silence would have been filled with the distant hum of my wife's podcast as she painted in her studio, or the chaotic symphony of the kids playing in the backyard, their shrieks of laughter echoing through the open kitchen window. Now, the silence was just an amplifier for the frantic beating of my own heart and the relentless inner monologue of my failure. I ran my hand along the cool granite of the kitchen countertop, the one we had saved for over 2 years to install. We celebrated its installation with a cheap bottle of champagne, feeling like royalty in our suburban kingdom. Every corner of this house held a memory, a ghost of a life I had systematically dismantled. It was a life I didn't just lose, I actively traded it away for a dream, a seductive digital promise whispered through fiber optic cables and glowing screens. It started, as these things often do, with a quiet dissatisfaction. My life was good, objectively good. I had a stable job in logistics, a decent salary, a loving wife, 2 healthy children, and this house. Our piece of the American dream, complete with a mortgage that felt both like an anchor and a validation of our adulthood. But good wasn't enough. I felt like I was on a treadmill, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. My income was predictable, our budget was meticulously planned, and our future felt like a straight, well-paved road that led to a comfortable but ultimately unexciting destination. I craved a shortcut, a fast lane. I found it in the shimmering, volatile world of cryptocurrencies. It began as a hobby, a small-scale investment. I read articles, watched hours of YouTube analysis, and lurked on Reddit forums where tales of overnight millionaires were as common as memes. The language was intoxicating: decentralization, blockchain, the future of finance. It felt less like gambling and more like joining a revolution. I bought my first fraction of a Bitcoin when it was climbing, a small stake that felt like a huge risk at the time. I showed my wife the app on my phone, the little green number that represented our modest profit. She smiled, a little confused but supportive. "As long as you're not using the kids' college fund," she joked, a line that now feels like a chilling prophecy. That small initial success was the hook. It was followed by another and then another. I diversified, buying into Ethereum, feeling like a seasoned Wall Street trader as I explained the technological advantages of its smart contracts to my wife, who would nod along, her eyes glazed over but her faith in me unwavering. My confidence swelled with my portfolio. I wasn't just a logistics manager anymore. I was an investor, a visionary who saw the future before the rest of the world caught on. The thought of a passive income, of money making money while I slept, became an obsession. My steady paycheck started to feel like chump change compared to the daily gains I was seeing on the screen. The conversations in my head shifted from planning our next family vacation to calculating my exit strategy, my moonshot number that would set us free. The market was on fire. Everyone was talking about it. It was the digital gold rush, and I was convinced I had found a rich vein, but my progress felt too slow. The gains were impressive in percentages, but the capital I had invested was still relatively small. To get the life-changing returns I dreamed of, I needed more skin in the game. I needed leverage. The idea started as a whisper, a dangerous what if. What if I took out a loan? A home equity line of credit, to be specific. The logic was flawless in my bull market-addled mind. The interest rate on the loan was a pittance compared to the meteoric returns of Bitcoin and Ethereum. It wasn't a gamble, it was financial arbitrage. I was simply using the bank's cheap money to buy an asset that was appreciating at an exponential rate. It was the ultimate life hack, a masterclass in risk management, or so I told myself. Convincing my wife was the hardest part. She was cautious by nature, her financial philosophy built on the solid bedrock of saving, budgeting, and avoiding unnecessary debt. When I first brought it up, she looked at me as if I'd suggested we join the circus. I spent weeks laying the groundwork, showing her charts, articles, and projections. I framed it not as a risk, but as a surefire path to securing our family's future. I painted a picture of a life without a mortgage, of fully funded college accounts, of traveling the world without a single financial worry. I told her I was doing this for us, for the kids. The truth is, I was doing it for me, for my ego, for the thrill of the win. Eventually, her love and trust in me overrode her better judgment. She agreed, her signature on the loan documents a testament to her faith in the man she married. I remember the day the loan was approved. A significant six-figure sum was deposited into our bank account. It felt like an infusion of pure power. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the entire amount to the crypto exchange. The process was sterile, digital, a series of clicks and confirmations that belied the monumental gravity of the act. As I watched the order for Bitcoin and Ethereum fill, I didn't feel fear. I felt an exhilarating sense of destiny. I was a modern-day pioneer, a financial astronaut strapping himself into a rocket ship fueled by debt and ambition, pointed directly at the moon. I had taken the biggest risk of my life, but in that moment, standing in the kitchen of the very house I had just gambled away, it felt like the safest and smartest decision I had ever made. I was on top of the world, completely blind to the dizzying height from which I was about to fall. The first few months were a blur of euphoria, a golden age of digital prosperity. My crypto portfolio didn't just grow, it exploded. Every morning I would wake up, reach for my phone before even saying good morning to my wife, and watch in awe as the numbers climbed higher. It was better than coffee, a pure, uncut shot of adrenaline and validation. I felt like a king, a financial genius who had cracked the code to modern wealth. We started to live the life I had promised. We weren't extravagant, not yet, but the suffocating pressure of our budget was gone. We'd go out for dinner on a whim, buy the expensive organic groceries without a second thought, and I finally replaced the aging family minivan with a brand new SUV, paying for a significant portion of it by skimming some of my crypto profits. My wife was happy, truly happy. The worry lines around her eyes softened. She started spending more time in her art studio, her creativity rekindled now that the low-level hum of financial anxiety was gone. She saw me as her hero, the man who had the courage and foresight to lift them into a new stratum of life. Her admiration was as addictive as the rising price of Bitcoin. I even started to toy with the idea of quitting my job. My logistics career, once the very foundation of my identity and our family's security, now seemed like a quaint relic of a bygone era. Why would I spend 8 hours a day managing spreadsheets and shipping manifests when my investments were earning more than my annual salary in a good week? The idea of a fully passive income was no longer a dream. It was a tangible reality, just a few more percentage points away. I talked a big game about risk management, telling anyone who would listen about the importance of not being over-leveraged, but my actions betrayed my words. I was all in, emotionally and financially. My entire sense of self-worth became inextricably linked to the volatile dance of the cryptocurrency market. My moods were a direct reflection of the charts. A green day meant I was a cheerful, generous husband and father, while a red day turned me into a sullen, irritable ghost at the dinner table. My wife started to notice. "You seem distant," she said one evening as I scrolled through market analysis on my phone while she was trying to tell me about her day. I brushed it off, mumbling something about a big project at work, a lie that tasted bitter on my tongue. The truth was, I had no mental bandwidth for anything other than the market. It consumed my thoughts, my conversations, my very being. The kids felt it too. I was physically present but mentally absent, my gaze always drifting towards a screen, my mind occupied with support levels, resistance lines, and the endless stream of news and speculation. Then came the first real dip. It wasn't a crash, just a sharp, sudden correction that shaved 20% off my portfolio in a single day. The online forums were ablaze with bravado and memes about hodling and buying the dip, but a cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. For the first time, the number on the screen was significantly less than the amount of the loan I had taken out. The easy confidence I had projected began to crack. I tried to hide my anxiety from my wife, putting on a brave face and regurgitating the optimistic talking points from crypto influencers. "It's just a healthy correction," I'd say with a forced smile. "The market needs to cool down before the next leg up." But she could see through it. She saw the way I compulsively checked my phone, the dark circles forming under my eyes from sleepless nights spent watching the flickering red candles of the Asian market session. The unspoken tension in our home became a third resident. The easy intimacy we once shared was replaced by a chasm of my own making, a gulf of anxiety and secrets. Arguments started over small, insignificant things, an unwashed dish, a forgotten appointment, but they were never really about the dish or the appointment. They were about the elephant in the room, the massive, leveraged bet I had made with our family's entire future. The house itself started to feel different. The walls that had once felt like a protective embrace now seemed to be closing in, a constant, physical reminder of the collateral for my enormous debt. I'd walk through the rooms, and instead of seeing our life, I'd see the bank's asset. The scuff mark on the wall in the hallway, the one the kids made with a toy truck that we always laughed about, now looked like an imperfection, a demerit in the eyes of a future property appraiser. I became a ghost in my own home, haunted by the specter of my own hubris. I was living a lie, pretending to be the confident, successful investor while internally I was being consumed by a raging fire of panic. Selling was not an option. That would mean realizing a catastrophic loss and admitting to my wife, and to myself, that I had made a terrible mistake. My only hope was for the market to rebound. So I held on, my grip tightening with desperation as the market continued to slide sideways and then further down. The dream of paying off the loan in a few months with massive profits was replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of the first repayment date looming on the calendar. The passive income I had fantasized about had morphed into a monstrous debt that demanded to be fed, and my regular income, the one I had so recently scorned, was nowhere near enough to cover it. The rocket ship I had strapped us to wasn't going to the moon. It was plummeting back to Earth, and I was just beginning to understand that there was no parachute. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, grinding bleed that stretched over weeks, a death by 1,000 cuts. Every small rally was a false dawn, a cruel glimmer of hope that would be mercilessly extinguished by an even deeper plunge. The crypto news cycle, once a source of excitement and optimism, had turned into a litany of horror stories. Major companies in the space filing for bankruptcy, widespread accusations of financial machinations, and governments around the world threatening harsh regulations. The digital gold rush had become a stampede for the exits, and I was trapped in the middle of it, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of my potential loss. The final, fatal blow came on a Wednesday morning. I woke up to a string of frantic notifications on my phone. A major cryptocurrency exchange had frozen withdrawals, citing extreme market conditions. It was the Lehman Brothers moment of the crypto world, a catastrophic failure of confidence that sent a shockwave of panic across the entire market. I watched in detached horror as the price of Bitcoin and Ethereum went into freefall. It wasn't a dip or a correction, it was a liquidation. The numbers on my screen, which once represented our dreams and my ego, were bleeding away in real time. In the space of a few hours, my portfolio, once valued in the high six figures, was worth less than a used car. And the loan, the massive, unyielding debt, remained untouched, a monument to my greed. There was no more adrenaline, no more fear, just a hollow, ringing emptiness. It was the silence after a bomb blast. I sat on the edge of our bed for what felt like an eternity, the phone screen glowing with the red carnage of my financial ruin. I knew I couldn't hide it any longer. The confession was the single most difficult thing I have ever had to do. I found my wife in the kitchen, humming softly as she watered her plants, completely oblivious to the fact that our world had just been incinerated. I stood there for a moment, watching her, etching this last peaceful image into my memory. When I finally spoke, my voice was a broken, unrecognizable croak. I told her everything. I didn't try to make excuses or soften the blow. I laid the full, ugly truth of my recklessness and failure at her feet. I watched her face as the words sank in, a slow, agonizing transformation from confusion to disbelief, then to a dawning horror that stole the color from her cheeks. The final expression was not the explosive anger I had braced myself for. It was something far worse, a quiet, profound, and soul-shattering disappointment. In that moment, I saw our entire future together crumble and turn to dust in her eyes. It wasn't just about the money or the house. I had broken her trust, the very bedrock of our marriage. I had gambled with our children's security and lost, all in the service of my own pride. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The bank's automated calls started, then the letters, each one more threatening than the last. Notice of default. Risk of foreclosure. The corporate jargon was a cold, sterile language for the destruction of a family. I tried to find a job, sending out resumes to my old contacts in the logistics industry, but the gap on my resume and the hollowed-out look in my eyes made me a poor candidate. My confidence was shattered. I was a shell of the man I once was. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. We moved around each other like strangers, the silence thick with unspoken accusations and regrets. When we did talk, it was only to argue. The arguments were circular and toxic, always ending with the same devastating conclusion: I had ruined us. She looked at me and no longer saw the man she loved, the father of her children. She saw the architect of her misery. The day she told me she was leaving felt both shocking and inevitable. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I can't live in this house, waiting for them to kick us out. I can't look at you without seeing what you've done to us." She had arranged to stay with her sister in another state, a place where she could breathe, where she could protect the children from the impending fallout. The packing was a quiet, funereal affair. I watched as she methodically filled suitcases with the artifacts of our shared life. I tried to help, but my touch felt like a contamination. The kids were confused, asking why we couldn't all go to Auntie's house. I had no answers for them, only a gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be. The last image I have of them as a family is of her standing in the doorway, the kids holding her hands, looking back at me with a mixture of pity and resolve. Then she closed the door, and the click of the latch was the sound of my life breaking in two. I was alone, utterly and completely alone in a big, empty house that was no longer a home, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I had murdered. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was the loudest, most terrifying sound I had ever heard. The silence after they left was a living entity. It breathed in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun and exhaled a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. For the first few days, I barely moved from the sofa, the television murmuring in the background, a meaningless stream of noise to keep the thoughts at bay. The foreclosure notices kept coming, the red ink on the envelope screaming with an urgency I could no longer muster the energy to feel. Rock bottom isn't a single event, it's a place. It's a place where shame is your only companion and the future is a black, featureless wall. I started selling things. First, the new SUV for a fraction of what I'd paid. Then my collection of watches, my wife's jewelry that she had left behind, the high-end electronics. Each transaction was a small death, a peeling away of the layers of the man I used to be, the man who defined himself by his possessions. The money went to lawyers who offered little hope and to keeping the lights on for a few more weeks. I became a ghost in my own neighborhood. I'd wait until after dark to take out the trash, my head down, avoiding the possibility of a sympathetic glance or a well-meaning, "How are you doing?" from a neighbor. I was the cautionary tale, the man who had it all and threw it away on a digital pipe dream. There were dark moments, hours spent staring at the ceiling, contemplating an end to the suffocating weight of my failure. But then I'd see a photograph of my kids on the mantelpiece, their bright, innocent smiles from a time before I had poisoned their world, and I knew I couldn't give up. I owed them at least that much. The turning point wasn't a grand epiphany, but a simple, humbling necessity. I ran out of money. I took a job at a local hardware store. The work was physical, unloading trucks, stocking shelves, mixing paint. It was a world away from the abstract, digital realm of my former life. My hands, once soft from typing, became calloused and sore. My back ached at the end of every day. But for the first time in over a year, I felt real. I was earning a paycheck, however small, through honest labor. There was a simple dignity in it that I hadn't found in the speculative frenzy of the crypto market. I started to build a new life from the rubble of the old one. It was a life of radical simplicity, governed by a strict budget written in a cheap notebook. My income was meager, but it was mine. It was tangible. I could hold it in my hand. It wasn't a volatile number on a screen that could vanish while I slept. The house, of course, was lost. The day the bank finally took possession, I didn't feel the crushing grief I had expected. I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. I walked out the front door with a single duffel bag of clothes and didn't look back. That house was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum of my mistakes, and I was finally free of it. I found a small, one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the other side of town. It was small and the walls were thin, but it was clean, and it was a place I could afford. I started to rediscover the small joys I had long forgotten. the taste of a hot coffee on a cold morning, the satisfaction of a perfectly organized shelf of paint cans, the simple pleasure of reading a book from the library instead of staring at a stock market chart. I began to understand that true wealth has nothing to do with your bank balance or investment portfolio. True wealth is a quiet mind. It's the love of your children. It's the ability to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. I started calling the kids. The first few calls were excruciatingly awkward. My ex-wife would stay on the line, a silent guardian, her presence a reminder of all that was broken between us. But I persisted. I didn't make grand promises or try to justify my past actions. I just asked them about school, about their friends, about their lives. Slowly, cautiously, the walls began to come down. I started seeing them on weekends. I couldn't take them to fancy restaurants or buy them expensive toys anymore. Instead, we'd go to the park, throw a baseball, or visit the free museum downtown. And a funny thing happened. Without the distractions of money, we started to actually connect. We talked, we laughed. I was no longer the distracted, screen-obsessed ghost. I was just their dad, present and accounted for. My relationship with my ex-wife found a new, quiet equilibrium. The anger had faded, replaced by a sort of sad, weary understanding. We would never be husband and wife again, but we could be partners in raising our children. There's no grand Hollywood ending to my story. I didn't discover a forgotten Bitcoin wallet that made me rich again. I didn't win my wife back. I'm still paying off a mountain of debt that will likely follow me for the rest of my life. But I am not the man I was. I lost everything I thought I wanted, only to find the things I truly needed. I traded a life of leveraged luxury for one of humble authenticity. My world is smaller now, but it is infinitely more real. I find my passive income not in market returns, but in the interest paid on a moment of shared laughter with my son. My best investment is the time I spend with my daughter. My only risk management strategy is to be honest, to be present, and to be grateful for the simple, fragile beauty of a new day. I am a man who lost a house, but in the process, I finally started to build a home within myself. Thanks for walking with me through this story. But don't stop here, let's keep the conversation going. What was your first reaction when you heard this? Did it remind you of a moment in your own life? Comment your thoughts below because your perspective might be exactly what someone else here needs to hear.